The alien queen opened my cabin door, then she saw her princess sitting beside me. The door came off its hinges before I even heard footsteps outside. 1 second I was pouring tea, the next, the whole frame buckled inward with a shriek of metal, and cold night air rushed into my cabin like something alive. I dropped the kettle. It hit the floor and rolled under the table, forgotten, because standing in the broken doorway was something that made every instinct in my body scream to run. She was massive, taller than the doorframe itself, with skin like polished dark stone, and 4 eyes that glowed faint violet in the dim light of my cabin. Armor plated her shoulders and arms, the kind built for war, not ceremony. Her hands ended in claws long enough to tear through solid steel, and right now, those claws were raised, ready, pointed straight at me. I did not have a weapon. I had never needed one out here, not in 3 years of living alone on this old transport ship, parked at the edge of a quiet trade route. My hands went up on instinct, empty, shaking slightly, though I tried to hide it. "Don't move," the creature said. Her voice came out layered, like 3 tones speaking at once, rough with something that sounded like barely controlled fury. My translator device on the table blinked as it caught the words and rendered them into something I could understand. I did not move. I could not have moved even if I wanted to. Every part of me had gone still, waiting for the moment those claws would come down. Then a small voice spoke from behind me. "Mom?" The creature's eyes shifted, and for the first time since the door exploded inward, that murderous focus broke. Her gaze moved past my shoulder, toward the corner of the cabin, where a young girl sat curled up on my narrow bunk, wrapped in one of my old jackets, a half-finished puzzle spread out beside her. The girl was not human. Her skin held a soft bronze color, and her fingers had 1 extra joint each, delicate and quick when she used them to sketch shapes on a small handheld screen. But right now, those fingers were frozen mid-motion, and her wide golden eyes stared back at the massive figure in my doorway, with something between shock and disbelief. "Mira," the creature whispered, and this time, her voice cracked down the middle, all the fury draining out of it in an instant. "Mira, is that truly you?" "Mom, you found me," the girl said, and she said it with a smile, not fear. She said it the way a child says something when they are relieved, not the way a hostage speaks to their captor. That single sentence changed everything in the room. I want you to understand what this cabin actually looked like before the door broke down, because it matters more than anything else in this story. There were no chains anywhere, no locked doors keeping her trapped inside. No restraints of any kind, just a half-finished puzzle of some distant galaxy scattered across my small table, a mug of tea that had gone cold hours ago sitting beside it, and a girl who had been laughing at something I said only minutes earlier, before the world exploded into chaos. 3 weeks earlier, I had been running routine diagnostics on my ship's outer hull sensors when an alert flashed across my monitor. Something had entered the system, moving fast, trailing smoke, and losing altitude. I nearly ignored it, thinking it was debris, until the shape resolved into something built for a passenger, not cargo. An escape pod, falling too fast, spinning out of control, heading straight toward the rocky moon my ship orbited near. I do not remember deciding to help. My hands moved before my mind caught up, pulling my small shuttle out of the docking bay and chasing that falling pod through the thin atmosphere, matching its speed, guiding it down as gently as I could manage, with equipment never designed for rescue work. When the pod finally settled onto the rocky surface, cracked and steaming, I pulled the hatch open expecting to find nothing, or worse, someone already gone. Instead, I found a child. She was curled in the corner of the pod, arms wrapped around her knees, shaking. Her clothes were torn, her skin covered in dust and dried blood from a cut along her arm. When she looked up at me, her 4 golden eyes went wide with terror, and she pressed herself further into the corner, as far from me as the small space allowed. I did not know her language then. My translator device was old, barely functional, picking up only fragments of what she said between broken breaths. But I understood fear when I saw it, in any species, so I did not grab her. I did not shout orders. I simply sat down on the rocky ground outside the pod, keeping my distance, and waited. It took almost 2 hours before she crawled out on her own. Her name was Mira, I learned eventually, Once my translator caught enough words to piece together sentences. She had been fleeing a conflict, something involving her homeworld, and forces that wanted to use her as a bargaining piece against her mother. The pod had launched during an attack, meant to carry her to safety, but something had gone wrong with its navigation, sending her far off course into a system nobody from her side even knew existed. I brought her back to my ship because leaving her alone on that moon was not something I could live with. I gave her the spare bunk, gave her food from my rations, and did not ask questions until she was ready to answer them. It took days before she trusted me enough to speak more than short, frightened sentences. It took a full week before she smiled for the first time, when I accidentally burned dinner so badly that smoke filled the entire cabin and set off every alarm on the ship. She thought that was the funniest thing she had ever seen. After that, something between us shifted. She started asking questions about my world, about human customs, about the strange five-pointed shape I used to draw on scraps of paper without thinking. Her species apparently had no natural equivalent to a star shape, and she became almost obsessed with learning to draw one correctly, filling page after page with lopsided attempts that made her laugh every time she failed. I taught her simple things, how to make tea the way I liked it, too sweet, which she copied, and then declared to be exactly her preference too. How to play card games using a deck I found buried in a storage locker, which she picked up faster than I ever managed. How to fall asleep without nightmares, some nights sitting beside her bunk until her breathing calmed and her small frame finally relaxed. I never sent word to anyone about what I was hiding. Not because I planned to keep her forever, but because every time I considered reporting her location to any nearby station, I remembered the way she flinched at loud voices, the way she still sometimes woke gasping from dreams about the attack that separated her from her family. Whoever came looking for her, whether friend or enemy, I needed to know first which one they were before I handed her over to anyone. I did not expect her mother to find us so soon, and I certainly did not expect her mother to arrive ready for war. Standing in my broken doorway now, the massive figure lowered her claws slowly, though her whole body still radiated tension like a coiled spring. Her four eyes moved from Mira, to the puzzle on the table, to the cold tea, to the jacket wrapped around her daughter's shoulders, cataloging every detail with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You are unharmed," she said quietly, though it sounded more like a question than a statement, as if she needed to hear it confirmed aloud before she could believe her own eyes. "I'm fine, Mom," Mira said, sliding off the bunk and crossing the small cabin to stand beside her mother. She reached up, and the massive creature knelt down without hesitation, folding her daughter into an embrace that looked strong enough to crush stone yet somehow remained impossibly gentle. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I stood frozen near the table, unsure whether moving would draw unwanted attention back toward me, unsure whether the danger had truly passed or simply paused. When the creature finally released her daughter and stood back to her full height, her eyes turned toward me again, and this time I saw something different in them. Not the murderous fury from before, but something sharper, more calculating, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she had not expected to encounter. "You are the one who found her," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I answered, keeping my voice steady, despite the way my heart still pounded against my ribs. 3 weeks ago, her pod crashed near this system. I helped her land safely. Why? The single word carried weight I had not expected. She wanted an actual answer, not a simple explanation. I thought about lying, about making myself sound more heroic than I felt in that moment. But something about the intensity in her gaze told me lies would not serve me well here. Because she was scared, and alone, I said, and leaving a child like that felt wrong, no matter where she came from. The creature studied me for several long seconds, her expression unreadable behind those glowing violet eyes. Then she glanced toward Mira, who watched the exchange with an expression of quiet hope, as if she desperately wanted her mother to understand what I had understood weeks earlier. "Our records on your species describe something very different," the creature finally said, straightening to her full imposing height. "We were told humans meet strangers with suspicion, with weapons, with violence, as a first response rather than a last resort. My scouts detected an unregistered vessel harboring my daughter, and every report from our historians suggested I would find her injured, or worse, held for ransom against our house. I understand why you thought that, I said carefully. I imagine that fear is what brought 30 warships to my doorstep tonight. Something flickered across her face, surprise perhaps, that I knew about the fleet waiting somewhere beyond my ship's hull. You are perceptive, she said. Yes, I gave the order to prepare full engagement the moment we traced her signal here. I expected to need it. You could have simply asked before breaking down my door, I said, and immediately regretted the words, worried they sounded too bold for the situation. But instead of anger, something that might have been amusement crossed her features. A queen who has spent 3 weeks searching every corner of known space for her missing daughter does not pause to knock, she said, especially not when every report suggested the worst possible outcome awaited her. Mira tugged gently at her mother's arm, drawing those violet eyes back down toward her. Mom, he never hurt me. He never even raised his voice at me. Not once. He gave me his own bunk and slept on the floor because he said guests should always get the better bed. He learned my favorite foods and tried to cook them, even though he kept getting them wrong. He taught me card games and let me win, even when I know now that he was letting me win. He sat outside my door every night for the first week because I couldn't sleep without knowing someone was close by. Each word seemed to soften something in the massive creature's posture, the tension in her shoulders easing bit by bit as her daughter spoke. By the time Mira finished, the queen's claws had lowered completely, no longer poised for any kind of attack. You called me your mother, the queen said softly to me, though her eyes remained on her daughter. That is what your reports say, isn't it? That humans see relationships in terms of family units, mother, child, protector. Something like that, I said. Then perhaps, she continued, turning back toward me fully now, our historians have been studying the wrong examples of your species for far too long. I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing, simply stood there while the queen took a slow step further into my cabin, her massive frame somehow seeming less threatening now that the immediate danger had passed. She looked around the small space, taking in details I had never really noticed before. The worn furniture, the mismatched dishes, the small drawings taped haphazardly to the wall, dozens of attempts at that 5-pointed star shape, each one slightly better than the last. She has been practicing, the queen said, almost to herself, studying the drawings with an expression I could not quite place. She's stubborn, I said, and immediately worried that calling the daughter of a queen stubborn might not be wise. But Mira laughed from beside her mother, and the queen's mouth curved into something that might have been the beginning of a smile on her unfamiliar features. She gets that from me, the queen said. The tension that had filled my small cabin since the door burst open finally began to drain away, replaced by something calmer, more uncertain, but far less dangerous. I found myself breathing normally again, for the first time since this entire encounter began. I owe you a debt I cannot easily repay, the queen said, turning her full attention back toward me. You kept my daughter safe during a time when our entire kingdom stood on the edge of collapse. The conflict that sent her fleeing has only grown worse in her absence. Enemies who wished to use her against me searched just as desperately as I did, and if they had found her instead of you, I do not wish to imagine what might have happened. I didn't do it expecting any kind of reward, I said honestly. I know, she said. That is precisely why you deserve one. Before I could argue, she reached toward a device mounted on her armor, tapping it with one claw. A moment later, a small holographic projection flickered to life above her palm, displaying what looked like some kind of official seal, glowing faintly gold against the dim cabin light. This marks you under the protection of our royal house, she explained, showing me the projection. No vessel bearing our colors will ever raise a weapon against you again. No traitor, no scout, no soldier from our kingdom will ever treat you as anything less than an honored guest, wherever you travel within our territory. That's generous, I said, still slightly overwhelmed by everything happening so quickly. But I really don't need anything in return. You misunderstand, the queen said, her tone firm but not unkind. This is not merely a gift. It is a debt owed by our entire royal house, and debts like this are not meant to be refused. My daughter's safety is worth more than any treasure my kingdom holds. You gave that safety freely, without knowing who she was or what reward might follow. That kind of choice deserves recognition. Mira stepped forward again, looking up at me with an expression I had grown familiar with over the past 3 weeks. The same look she gave me whenever she wanted something and knew exactly how to ask for it. "Will you visit us sometime?" she asked. "After everything settles down at home, I want to show you where I grew up. I want you to meet my little brother, and I want to show everyone the way you taught me to draw stars, because nobody back home believes I actually learned it from a human." I glanced at the Queen, unsure whether such an invitation carried any real weight, or whether it was simply the wishful thinking of a child excited to reunite with her family. But the Queen nodded slowly, confirming the offer herself. "You would be welcome," she said, "more than welcome. Consider it an open invitation, valid whenever you wish to accept it." Outside my cabin, through the cracked doorway, I could see faint lights moving in formation against the dark sky, the silhouettes of those 30 warships still holding their positions, waiting patiently for their queen's next order. It struck me then just how close this entire encounter had come to ending, very differently, how a single misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment from either side could have turned this reunion into something far more tragic. "Your fleet," I said carefully. "They came ready for a fight. They came ready to rescue my daughter by any means necessary," the Queen corrected. "I did not know what state I would find her in. I prepared for the worst, because hope alone has failed me too many times during this conflict. But I am glad, more than words can properly express, that such measures proved unnecessary tonight." She turned toward the broken doorway, studying the twisted metal frame with something that looked almost like embarrassment. "I will have this repaired before we depart, along with any other damage my arrival may have caused to your vessel." "I appreciate that," I said, and found myself almost smiling, despite everything that had happened in the span of just a few minutes. Mira crossed the cabin one final time, wrapping her arms around my waist in a quick, tight hug that caught me slightly off guard. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice muffled against my jacket, "for everything, for not being scared of me when I was scared of everyone else." "You never needed to be scared of me," I said, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "Not for a single moment." She pulled back, looking up at me with those golden eyes, brighter now than they had been in weeks, free of the constant undercurrent of fear that had colored her expression since the day I found her. "I know that now," she said. "I think I knew it the very first night, actually. You just needed time to prove it." The Queen watched this exchange with an expression that had softened considerably since she first broke through my door, and when her daughter finally stepped back to stand beside her, the massive creature placed one careful hand atop the girl's head, claws retracted, gentle as any parent comforting a child after a long and frightening separation. "We should return home," the Queen said. "There is much to repair, both within our kingdom and within the relationships strained by these recent events. But before we leave, I want you to understand something clearly, human." "I'm listening," I said. "Whatever stories our historians tell about your species, whatever fears our scouts report back from encounters gone wrong, I will remember this night differently. I will remember a stranger who chased a falling ship through hostile atmosphere without knowing who or what he might find inside. I will remember a man who gave up his own bed, learned an unfamiliar language, and spent 3 weeks teaching a frightened child how to trust again, expecting nothing in return." Her 4 eyes held mine steadily, and for the first time since the door broke open, I felt no fear at all standing before her, only a strange sense of quiet understanding passing between two very different beings who had somehow found common ground in the safety of a child neither of us had expected to matter so much. "That is the story I will tell," she continued, "not the one written in old reports and outdated fears, but the one I witnessed with my own eyes tonight." With that, she turned toward the broken doorway, gesturing for Mira to follow. The girl paused at the threshold, looking back at me one last time with a smile that held none of the sorrow from her first days aboard my ship. "I'll visit," she said. "I promise. And next time, I'll bring you proper tea from home. You'll like it even more than the kind you make." "I look forward to it," I said, and I meant every word. They stepped out into the night together, mother and daughter reunited, and moments later, I watched through my cracked doorway as the formation of distant lights began to shift, the warships slowly turning away from my small vessel, their weapons never once fired, their mission complete without a single moment of violence after all. I stood alone in my cabin for a long while afterward, staring at the space where the door used to be, at the half-finished puzzle still scattered across my table, at the collection of lopsided star drawings taped haphazardly along the wall. The silence felt different now, not empty the way it had for years before Mira arrived, but full of memory, full of proof that a single choice to help a frightened stranger could ripple outward into something far larger than I ever imagined. Somewhere out among those stars she loved to draw, a queen carried her daughter home, and somewhere in the quiet aftermath of that night, I began to understand that the measure of any person, human or otherwise, was never found in the fear they inspired, but in the safety they chose to offer, when nothing required them to offer it at all.